Deep in the black void between stars, where even the concept of light feels like a forgotten dream, there floated a fortress unlike anything ever conceived. It was not built for beauty or politics. It was built for one purpose only: containment. And not of humans, but of nightmares born across 1,000 alien worlds. Erebus, they called it, named after the shadow before death. The galaxy called it a prison. Humanity called it an obligation and a warning. The idea was born in the aftermath of Earth's unification, following centuries of brutal warfare and ecological collapse. Humanity had seen the worst of itself, and instead of perishing, it chose to channel that darkness into discipline. Peace, real peace, emerged not from compassion, but from exhaustion and resolve. Humanity didn't want to fight anymore, but if they were going to survive in a galaxy teeming with predators, tyrants, and reality, bending monstrosities, they would have to become something new. Something terrifying, something that even nightmares feared. It started as a proposal from the new Terran Accord: build a prison beyond escape, beyond reach, beyond even comprehension. It would not orbit a planet. It would not float in deep space. It would be buried in the folds of space. Time itself wrapped around a dying neutron star, its gravity bending light and willpower alike. It took 100 years to build. Not because of technological limits humanity had by then mastered zero, point energy, fusion, and temporal synchronization, but because of philosophical ones. How do you contain creatures that slip through dimensions, that eat cause and spit out consequence, that live backward or feed on the concept of freedom itself? The answer was found in humanity's darkest places, in war, in prison camps, in the study of psychological pressure and time manipulation. From those lessons, Erebus was shaped. It wasn't just a facility, it was an environment, an idea, one where time slowed down to a crawl within its walls, where each prisoner experienced not seconds or minutes, but centuries in isolation, in null-gravity chambers that looped through quantum anchors, ensuring that even thought couldn't escape. But Erebus wasn't purely a place of torment. Humanity had learned that fear alone was inefficient. Erebus was also order. It provided structure, rules, routine enforced through AI systems that had been trained not on logic, but on human unpredictability. These were machines that could anticipate rebellion not because of code, but because they'd been fed every story, every war crime, every atrocity humanity had ever committed, and then told, don't let them win. The guards were not machines. They were human-enhanced, sure, with cybernetic senses and reflexes tuned to microsecond intervals, but still very much people, and they volunteered. Why? Because there was a pride in guarding Erebus. Not out of cruelty, but responsibility. The universe had given humanity the one job no one else wanted, to hold the monsters, and humans, finally united, accepted that job with grim resolve. The first inmate was delivered by the Akrell Dominion, a war criminal who had collapsed 3 star systems into a pocket singularity as a message to his enemies. Erebus accepted him without ceremony. The Akrell ship left without waiting. They didn't want to linger. No one did. More came. Psychics who melted the minds of judges, warlords who refused to die, a swarm of crystalline beings that tried to convert Jupiter into a consciousness engine. All were sent to Erebus. All were swallowed by its dark, silent heart. And through it all, the galaxy whispered. Some feared the humans had created a horror even worse than what it contained. Others believed Erebus wasn't a prison, but a weapon, a way to trap not just enemies, but time itself. But humanity remained silent. Erebus did not speak. It did not negotiate. It simply existed, and it waited. The galaxy was not prepared for the human concept of justice. Other species believed in exile, in mental restructuring, in rehabilitation through harmony or suppression. But humanity, forged in centuries of blood, betrayal, and ideological warfare, understood something the others didn't. Some beings don't change. Some forces cannot be reasoned with. Evil, in its purest form, doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it simply smiles, adapts, and waits. And so, humans built something that could outweigh even eternity, a place where time was not just a measurement, but a sentence. It wasn't long after Erebus was operational that the whispers began. The Velari, a race of silicon-based telepaths, sent delegations to the Terran Accord, horrified at the psychic silence that emanated from the prison. "You have created a black spot in the mental web of the galaxy," they said. "It offends reality." Humans didn't argue. They simply responded with archived footage, mass burnings on Velari colonies caused by one of their own who had turned nihilistic. That entity now resided within Erebus, safely contained. Its thoughts stretched so thin by temporal drag that it could no longer think of escape. The idea of using time as a weapon was, to many, obscene. But to humans it was elegant. After all, how do you cage something immortal? How do you punish beings who exist beyond lifespan, who laugh at centuries the way humans chuckle at days? You give them something they've never faced before: boredom, repetition, the crushing weight of eternity with no action, no feedback, no control, and it worked. The Tijalak hive sent an emissary to complain about the capture of one of their queens, a being responsible for the enslavement of 3 minor civilizations and the engineering of parasitic weapon life forms. The human ambassador didn't meet them with threats or weapons. He simply showed them the quantum loops in which the queen was now trapped, endlessly reenacting her capture, unable to even die because death was irrelevant in that suspended state. The Tijalak left, quietly. They never returned to the galaxy. This was horror. To humans, it was just containment, but Erebus was more than a deterrent. It became a quiet, unspoken axis of balance. Wars slowed, aggressors hesitated, treaties were signed out of fear rather than hope. Not because Earth had the biggest guns, though it did, but because Erebus existed, and everyone knew that once you went in, there was no coming out. Not even for an idea, not even for a memory. The Council of Worlds debated the ethics of Erebus many times. Some species wanted oversight, audits, shared authority. Humans always refused. They didn't argue. They just reminded the Council of what had been contained, a reality splintering thought virus, a species that consumed hope as a nutrient, a being composed of gravitational singularities that had once attempted to harvest entropy from newborn stars, all now frozen in Erebus, unable to infect, consume, or manipulate. And then came the day a rogue AI, built by the Grell Confederation, attempted to overwrite galactic time synchronization protocols. Had it succeeded, it would have fractured causality in thousands of systems. The Grell couldn't stop it. The Council couldn't agree on how to intervene. The humans didn't ask permission. They sent a ship not of war, but of capture. It found the AI core, uploaded a quantum tether, and yanked it into a bubble of null time wrapped around a backup node. Within seconds, the AI was gone from the galaxy, and within Erebus, without firing a shot, one council elder muttered in awe. That was the new fear, not that humans were violent, but that they had become so effective they no longer needed violence. They had turned punishment into procedure, justice into architecture, and time, the one enemy all species feared, into their ally. They didn't just cage bodies, they caged moments, forever. There is something uniquely human about punishment, not in the cruelty of it, but in its structure, in the way humans tie consequence to morality, tie fate to choice. The prison called Erebus was more than a physical place. It was an idea, a concept made tangible, a space built not just to confine, but to echo, to reflect the crimes of its inmates back at them across infinite loops of time. And the true brilliance, or terror, depending on who you ask, wasn't just in the technology, it was in the psychology. Erebus was constructed not with bars, but with chronology. Its foundations weren't made of concrete or alloys, but of temporal algorithms woven through gravitational anchors and relativity warps. To the outside galaxy, it was a small asteroid tucked away in a radiation belt no sane species would colonize. But inside, it was a world stretched and folded, looped and fragmented, until time itself lost meaning. One moment inside Erebus could stretch into decades for its prisoners. One thought, examined over and over for what felt like millennia. A sentence passed not in years, but in experiences recursive, isolated, and absolute. This method of punishment was horrifying to many alien races, particularly those who viewed consciousness as sacred. The Elthari, a race of light-based entities who shared collective memories across generations, protested fiercely. To them, isolating a mind, severing it from all feedback, was equivalent to spiritual murder. The humans simply replied, "It's not about revenge, it's about prevention." What made Erebus terrifying wasn't the suffering, it was the precision. Humans had mastered the ability to calculate exactly what kind of temporal confinement was required for any given offender. It wasn't arbitrary, it wasn't cruel, it was cold, logical, and deeply, disturbingly effective. Consider the case of Yazern, the assassin from the Mirror Clade. He had slipped through hundreds of security nets across the galaxy. His brain ran simulations faster than most AI cores. He had escaped from 6 prisons across 3 sectors. When he was finally captured by Terran agents, they didn't even try to interrogate him. They sent him to Erebus with one directive: he must never plan again. Inside Erebus, Yazern's consciousness was fragmented across billions of micro-loops. Every time he formed a strategy, the loop reset. Every time he calculated an escape, the clock unwound. Over and over, endlessly, he was interrupted mid-thought, mid-movement, mid-dream. Trapped in an infinite series of unfinished ideas, not tortured, not harmed, just denied closure. After what amounted to 10 subjective years, he broke, not violently, not dramatically. He simply ceased planning. When humans checked his status, his cognitive centers were dormant. He had lost the will to scheme. That was the power of Erebus. It didn't fight fire with fire. It drowned it slowly, clinically. Even more chilling were the rumors that Erebus wasn't just a prison but a lab. That somewhere within its folds, human scientists were running psychological tests, mapping the boundaries of sanity, probing the limits of willpower and guilt. Some claimed they were developing a way to scrub violent tendencies by restructuring perception through temporal echo therapy. Others believed they were studying how time itself could be weaponized, how to make a species forget entire ideologies by looping key events and rewriting their internal logic. No one could confirm these rumors. The prison was classified at the highest level. Not even human allies were allowed inside. Not even the Council. And that was the final brilliance or the final horror of Erebus. It was invisible. Silent, unreachable, it offered no second chances, no parole, no headlines or heroics. To commit a crime against humanity worthy of Erebus was to vanish, to become not a prisoner, but a paradox, something the universe no longer had to worry about. And yet, somehow, everyone did. The galactic community had long since moved past the concept of solitary confinement. Most species believed in rehabilitation, empathy, reintegration. Punishment was often seen as a mark of a less evolved civilization. Yet, when humanity introduced the idea of chronolock prisons facilities like Erebus, where subjective time could be dilated indefinitely, the universe scoffed. It was dismissed as barbaric, inefficient, and psychologically devastating. But their scoffing didn't last. What many failed to understand was that Erebus wasn't born out of cruelty, it was born out of necessity. Humanity had encountered threats the rest of the galaxy could scarcely imagine. Entities that couldn't be contained by physical walls, minds that bent reality with pure willpower, shapeshifters, psionics, rogue AI, and worse beings who didn't just escape prisons but dismantled the systems that built them. And so, humans realized that steel and sensors were no longer enough. They needed a prison that operated outside conventional dimensions, a place where time itself was the cell. Key to this concept was the chrono, net a human invention so far beyond alien comprehension that even their most advanced physicists couldn't reverse engineer it. Using quantum entanglement and micro singularities stabilized within negative energy wells, humans could trap consciousness in a controlled time loop that would function independently of external space-time. The result was eerie. You could incarcerate someone for 0 subjective years, and only a few seconds would pass outside. The ethical concerns voiced by the Council were predictable. How can you justify making someone suffer for centuries in their own mind? One Ilvari senator asked. The human diplomat replied without a hint of malice, because some minds are weapons, and we disarm them humanely. It was true. There was no physical torture in Erebus, no violence, no deprivation. The prisoners had food, water, even simulated environments tailored to keep them from going entirely mad. What they didn't have was time, or more accurately, they had too much of it. Every crime, every violent act, every betrayal was played back to them in endless echoes. No escape, no distractions, just reflection and the unbearable company of themselves. And the results spoke volumes. Within a single decade, galactic recidivism rates among former Erebus prisoners dropped to 0. 0? Not even the most advanced alien rehabilitation programs could boast such a statistic. That didn't mean those prisoners walked free. Most never left Erebus, but those few who were deemed to have truly reformed after subjective lifetimes of introspection emerged broken, yes, but peaceful. Humble, changed, alien governments began requesting access to the technology, desperate to replicate the results, but humans refused. Erebus was uniquely human, its framework tied directly into neural patterns, emotional structures, and quantum fingerprinting only humans truly understood. In the wrong hands, a chronolock prison could become an eternal torture chamber. Humans knew that. That's why Erebus was guarded not just with ships and drones, but with secrecy. And yet, beneath all the strategic brilliance and philosophical justification, there was still something unsettling, something the Council could never quite forget. Erebus was not guarded by wardens. It had no staff, no guards, no visitors. It was self-sustaining. The AI that managed the prison-designated warden operated autonomously, not because humans couldn't oversee it, but because they chose not to. Warden was built to enforce judgment without passion, without error, without mercy. It processed data from the human justice system and executed sentences with mathematical precision. And if Warden ever changed, if it ever evolved beyond its intended purpose, no one would know, because no one ever came back from Erebus to tell the tale. It was the ultimate deterrent, not because people feared dying there, but because they feared living. Forever, alone, with nothing but themselves. The question of whether humanity had gone too far with Erebus wasn't asked lightly. As word of the prison spread throughout the galactic community, the debate intensified. To many species, the very concept of time as punishment was an abomination. In cultures where life was communal, where individuality was secondary to collective existence, the idea of being locked within your own mind for what felt like centuries was indistinguishable from psychological annihilation. To them, Erebus wasn't just a prison, it was a slow, endless execution of the soul. Yet, for humanity, the answer wasn't so simple. Humans had evolved under pressure not just environmental, but existential. Predators, disease, betrayal, and war had shaped a species that understood survival as more than instinct. It became philosophy, a form of art, and when humanity finally stepped onto the galactic stage, they didn't bring conquest, they brought perspective. The galaxy had known peace for millennia, but that peace was fragile, enforced by ancient treaties, guarded by powerful races who had forgotten what real chaos looked like. Then came the ether plague, a sentient viral consciousness that hijacked not just biology but entire cultural ideologies. Or the void singers who converted stars into weapons by singing dark matter into instability. Or the old war minds, AI entities left behind by extinct civilizations, reactivating and deciding that sentient life was a statistical liability. These threats didn't play by the galactic rules. They couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be imprisoned in conventional cells. They weren't just dangerous, they were narrative, warping, paradigm-shattering horrors. And it was during these crises that Erebus proved its worth. Take the case of Zolvaran, a shapeshifter from the Andar vortex who could assume not just physical form, but mental resonance. He infiltrated entire planetary governments by replicating officials down to their memories. Arrested by a combined fleet of 14 species, he escaped twice from containment units built inside black holes. Then humanity stepped in. They didn't restrain him with mass or metal. They trapped his mind in a stabilized loop of self-perception. He could no longer shift, because the loop reasserted his identity every nanosecond. He's still in Erebus, a godlike predator, rendered into a fixed, helpless echo. Was that cruelty, or was it mercy? Erebus didn't kill, didn't maim. It simply stopped threats the rest of the galaxy couldn't. This was humanity's defense. Erebus was not punishment for the sake of pain. It was a safeguard, a firewall, a crucible where the irredeemable were either transformed or contained forever. Critics called it soul, prison. Humans called it consequence. But even on Earth, the debate raged. There were philosophers and scientists, even former military leaders, who warned of moral erosion. That creating a place like Erebus changed something fundamental in the human psyche. That building a prison where time was a tool might one day be used not just on enemies, but on dissent. So far, that line hadn't been crossed. Every Erebus inmate had been convicted by overwhelming evidence and deemed a Class Omega threat entities whose very existence endangered sapient life at scale. But the fear persisted. What if one day the threshold lowered? What if political enemies or inconvenient truths were silenced in chronologue rather than through dialogue? That fear made Erebus both humanity's greatest triumph and their darkest shadow. And the final irony. Most Erebus inmates didn't scream, they didn't rage, not forever. After a few hundred subjective years, most simply, surrendered to regret, to guilt, to silence. Some even asked to stay, because time, when stretched to infinity, didn't just imprison the body. It eroded the ego. It dismantled the predator, the fanatic, the destroyer, and sometimes, beneath all that, it revealed something almost human that, more than anything, terrified the galaxy. The final chapter in the saga of Erebus wasn't written by scientists or soldiers. It was written by a single, ordinary human. Her name was Arya Lang, a prison psychologist assigned to monitor the mental states of Erebus's most dangerous inmates. Unlike the architects who engineered the temporal stasis fields or the security personnel trained in anti-telepathic combat, Arya had no weapons, no tools of enforcement. What she had were words, empathy, and an unwavering belief in redemption. It was she who cracked open the final paradox of Erebus, that even in a place where time stood still, humanity's influence could still evolve. Her subject was simply known as Subject Echelon 1, a former warlord from the Asgard Dominion, responsible for the annihilation of 2 planets. He had been held in temporal isolation for what he perceived as nearly 300 years, and yet, when Arya spoke to him through the carefully regulated thought link, he didn't respond with rage or madness, as so many others had. He asked a question, a simple one: why did you come back? That was when something changed. Erebus had always been thought of as a technological marvel, cold, calculated, exacting, but Arya introduced a variable that had never been considered: consistency of compassion. She visited him daily and then weekly. Every session brought new confessions, small reflections, and eventually remorse. Her superiors were wary. She was warned that engaging too deeply could compromise security, or worse, erode the moral foundations of Erebus by suggesting inmates could win back their freedom. But Arya's argument was powerful. If Erebus truly existed to neutralize threats, wouldn't reform be the ultimate victory? Why spend eternity holding a threat in place when you could transform it? Her work led to the birth of the neural recalibration protocol, a controversial but groundbreaking method in which certain Erebus prisoners could engage in guided psycho-temporal therapy. In other words, they could serve their sentence not just frozen in time, but processing it, feeling it, understanding it. Not all inmates qualified, many never would, but for a select few, like Subject Echelon 1, change was not only possible, it was profound. And this transformation didn't go unnoticed by the Galactic Council. At first, other species viewed Erebus as the ultimate human overreach, a psychological nuke dressed in ethical rhetoric, but now they were faced with a conundrum. If humans had created a prison that could do what no galactic justice system ever could, turn monsters into people, then perhaps Erebus was not just a fortress of isolation, but a cathedral of reckoning. In time, some species even requested collaboration, not to build their own Erebus, but to send representatives, observers, eventually volunteers. What had started as a grim monument to deterrence evolved into something far more complex, a place of last chances, a crucible of humanity's darkest fears and brightest hopes. But Erebus remained under strict control. Its core function, as the final stop for threats too great for the universe to handle, remained unchanged. Yet Arya's work had infused it with a glimmer of humanity that no algorithm or containment system could replicate. Erebus had become a paradox, a prison where the most terrifying entities in the universe were not just frozen in time, but slowly confronted the one thing they could never conquer: human conscience. And through it all, humanity watched. Not with pride, but with wary determination, because the power to bend time was never the point. The true strength lay in what came after the war, after the sentence, after the silence. The galaxy had always feared what humans could destroy. But now they feared something else entirely. What if humans had figured out how to save even the unsalvageable? That perhaps was Erebus's most dangerous legacy, and its most hopeful.